All right. Before we get started, I just wanted to mention this thing. This is an ad I got by email. I got to get my tail out here. This is an ad I got by email, and if you read it, the new restaurant with famous chef in IMM, the new restaurant with famous chef from Shangri-La and Peach Garden will surely be loved by you. Is that good writing? Yes or no? No. Why isn't it good writing? How could you improve it? Huh? What would you do if you were writing this copy, this ad copy? Would you write it like that? They actually paid people to do this? I'm serious. They probably paid somebody a lot of money to write crap. I'm bad writing like that. So, you guys, when you graduate, you can get jobs writing better than this, So how would you do it, anybody? How would you change this to make it better? Somebody volunteer. Huh? No volunteers? Oh, okay. Yeah, but then what if you were just going to start? So you could do it just with one sentence saying, "You will surely love our new restaurant with the famous chef from Shangri-La and Peach Garden." Or you could do it in what way? What's another way you could do it? Just think of theme ream structure. What do we normally do? You introduce a new thing in the ream, and then you make it the topic. Or, so this one, they're not really introducing it initially, but another way is, like you said, with having you, normally you would put you as the topic, because then the reader says, you, oh, he's talking about me. Then they pay attention. So in this case, what you could do is have the thing is, there is a new restaurant at IMM that has a famous chef from Peach Garden, and you will surely love it. So breaking it into two clauses sometimes, rather than having one long clause where you try to fit everything in there, and then having you, loved by you, which is something we don't normally say very much. We don't normally talk about love in the passive like that with the actor, So so there's lots of jobs available for good writers in advertisement, marketing, whatever. Okay, today we're turning to a lower level. Wait, I gotta try to unravel this. We've been talking about the clause level so far, and what I want to do now is go below the clause. So this week we'll go below the clause, and then next week we'll go above the clause, because the same principles, or very similar principles, operate on all levels of the clause. Somebody who ever used this before must have done like dancing and twirling. How do you get it to do this, right? I don't know what they do with this to get it so twirled up. That's good enough. So today we're going to be looking at the structure of groups and phrases, which is the constituents of the clause, the grammatical constituents of the clause. And we'll see that a lot of the same principles that we talked about that are operative at the clause level are also operative within the groups and phrases. And then also later on, when we go to the higher level, the clause complex, when we have groups of clauses together, which is almost like just like we talk about a noun group, you can have a clause group in a sense, and how they relate to each other, the relationships between the clauses in a clause complex. So one of the key differences in this theory compared to some other grammatical theories is they make a distinction between group and phrase. Most theories will call both of these phrases. They'll call this a noun group, a noun phrase, and this a preposition phrase. But in this theory, they make a principal distinction between a group, which is an expansion of a single word, and a phrase, which is a reduction of a clause. So as I talked about a little bit when we were talking about the circumstantial adjuncts, the preposition phrases are seen as minor processes. And in many languages, the prepositions actually derive from verbs historically. And so you can see that they're kind of reductions of clauses. And so that's why in this theory, they talk about nominal groups, verb groups, and adverbial groups, which are expansions, so you can have one, you can just say table, or you can say the table, or the blue table, or the large blue table. So you can expand out from the noun itself, and that's what's called a noun group. Or with a verb, you can expand out. So you can just say eat, or you could say has eaten, or has been eating, or will have been eating. So you can expand out from the verb. And a lot of people actually, one of the questions that a lot of people gave in their comments that they've been giving me is, what happens when you get multiple verbs? So we're going to be talking about that in this case. So somebody said, what about stop eating? Is that stop with eating as an argument or what? And we're going to be talking about how that's actually what's called a phase. So kind of the starting and stopping of an action. So we'll be talking about that's part of a verb group when you have more than one verb together in a group. But you have to distinguish that between multiple clauses together, because sometimes, I did that in order to help you, so then you've actually got a second clause going on there. And adverbial group's the same thing. So you can have a single adverb like quickly, or you can expand on that and say very quickly, or not so quickly, or quite quickly, so you can build on that as well. So these are expansions out from the individual noun, verb, or adverbial group. But with the phrases, you have a preposition, which I said is like a minor process, and then you have a complement. So the preposition takes a complement, just like a verb takes a complement, and we call that a range type complement in the preposition phrase. So this theory makes a principal distinction between these two, whereas most other theories don't. And it's an interesting difference, and you'll see how that works out. Now, starting with the nominal group, as I mentioned, you can expand out from, if you're talking about calendars, so here this is a technical term, by the way, thing is what you're kind of the main thing in a noun group. I can imagine Michael Halliday walking around and, what am I going to call this thing? This thing that's in the middle of the noun group is the most important thing there. What should I call it? I have to give it a technical term. What technical term should I give this thing? I can't think of anything to tell it. What is it? And then he comes up with thing. Okay, great. So the technical term is actually thing. So it's the thing you're talking about when you say a noun group. So it's the main meaning of a noun group. And so if we have something like calendars, then we can expand on this thing. We can talk about many different types of calendars. So we can talk about wall calendars or desk calendars or internet, on an app calendar or something like that. And then we can say, if it's a wall calendar, we can say whether it's an old wall calendar or a new wall calendar, a beautiful wall calendar, we can say something about that. And we can add on that, we can say a beautiful old wall calendar, or a very long old wall calendar, or something else. We can put another kind of characteristic there. And then we can number it. So we can say there's 3 old calendars, or there's 4 old calendars, or 1 old calendar somewhere. And then if we want to tie it to some specific situation, we can use a deictic element. These expressions like those, or my 3 beautiful old wall calendars, or those 3 beautiful old wall calendars. So you can see how we built up from the calendars. We built up this long noun group, this group of things. When all of these are modifying what type of calendar it is. Now, there are different types of modifiers, and so that's why I've given them different names here: deictic, numerative, epithet, and classifier, and thing. So the thing is the core of it, and so a noun group has to have a thing. It doesn't have to have all these others, but it does have to have a thing. Oh, no, actually, it doesn't even have to have a thing. I'll take that back. Generally, it will have a thing. So it's the semantic core of the nominal group. and it specifies a class of things. So when you just say calendars, you're talking about a class of things. You're not talking about a specific calendar. When you want to talk about a specific calendar, then you have to add a deictic. And we'll talk more about this as we go on. So it could be, the thing could be a common noun, a proper noun, you know, like a name, somebody's name, or the name of a city, or whatever. Or it could be a pronoun. Normally with pronouns and proper nouns, you don't have much expansion on those, but sometimes you can. And most of the other elements are things that modify it or classify the thing in some way. Now, I've used Greek letters here. Don't freak out about that. This is really just A, B, G, D, E, Z, or Z. This is where actually our Roman alphabet, the alphabet we use to write English, comes from Greek, although this is the handwritten form rather than the old, let me see. Do I have that? In his theory, we use these, but I can write on this, right? So this is really just, if you use the capital letters, this is just A, B. In Greek, this is written G, but it's actually this one. This is D. This is E. And this is Z, right? So in logic, we often use the Greek alphabet just as a way of showing some order. There's an order to it. So you could write A, B, C, D. Greek didn't have C, but the Latins added that later. But yeah, the idea of using these is just a way of ordering, just because B comes after A, G comes after B, D comes after G, E comes after D, and Z comes after E. So this is where we get our letters, right? So you can see the E and the Z. These are actually how they're written in Greek, this letter, but now we've changed that to that. So don't be afraid of that. It's good to know Greek. Like many of you, just to give you a little thing, how many people know why we write is it 2 S? 1 S. Is it 2 S's or 1 S? 1 S. Thank you. You don't have to spell well to be a good linguist. That's a memory thing. So why do we say Xmas sometimes instead of Christmas? Anybody know why? You've seen this, right? You've all seen this in advertisements and stuff where they say Xmas, right? Is because in Greek, this letter is pronounced chi or K, and it's pronounced with a KH sound, and so it's the first sound of Christ. And so it was written, for many years, it was written as an abbreviation for Christ. So Christmas is Christmas, and so they just used this as an abbreviation for the word Christ, which was a standard kind of abbreviation in early time, because the New Testament was written in Greek. You know. So knowing that, and also we have a thing, when you do statistics here, you will have something called, what? Chi-squared. It's a kind of statistical test that you will need to learn in doing a lot of types of statistical analyses. So this is called chi-squared because, again, it's the Greek letter chi. It's not x. We don't say x squared. It's chi-squared. So it's good to know a little Greek, or at least how to pronounce the letters. All right, now I got to erase this. Okay, so the first element is this deictic element, and the interesting thing about this is it parallels the theme in the clause because it's the thing that most ties what you're talking about to the current situation. So it's specific, there's two types, there's specific and non-specific deictics. So you have things like demonstrative pronouns like this and that, or these and those. You have interrogative pronouns like which. You have possessive pronouns like my car. So when you say something like this pointer or my pointer or which pointer, so that it kind of narrows down rather than just saying pointer, which just talks about a class of things. it narrows it down to one specific one in this particular context, right? So that's why it's deictic. Deictic, anything that's deictic is something that needs to be understood with reference to the time, place, or person speaking. So when I say I, that's deictic because you have to know who's speaking when you have to understand what I means. Or you have to know who's being talked to. And the same thing with this. Or if I say here, you know, what does here mean? You have to know where I'm standing to know where here means. You also have to kind of interpret what I mean by here, how big here is. So all of these types of things are specific deictics because they narrow down the interpretation of which of that class you're talking about. Because the thing, again, just tells you the class of thing. It doesn't tell you which one you're talking about. Where these help you to identify which one. Now in English, we also have the. So aside from saying this boat, that car, my coat, his book, John's money, which car, whose table, whatever book, the car, the boat, and whatever these. We can also have the car, the boat. Now, the is what we call a definite pronoun, a definite article, definite article. And what it does is it tells the hearer that they can identify which thing it is. So if I say my pointer, then you know you can identify which pointer because it's mine, it belongs to me. If I say this pointer, then you can identify which pointer because it's one that's close to me, because this means close to the speaker, that means away from the speaker. So if I say this, this pointer, or I say that pointer, if it's away from me, then you can identify it relative to where it is, compared, you know, if you know where the speaker is. Now, the doesn't give you that extra information. It does tell you you can identify it, but it doesn't tell you how you can identify it. And this is an interesting kind of thing that not all languages have. It's a lot of European languages have it, but outside Europe, there aren't that many languages that have definite marking. So with the, this one where I say by reference to either proximity to the speaker or relation to some person, that's the things like John's money is relation to some person. This boat is relation to the speaker, you know, close to the speaker. But the, which historically actually came from the word that. It came from one form of the verb, of the word that. But it just lost its sense of far from the speaker and just came to mean, it's identifiable, but I'm not telling you how to identify it. I'm just telling you that you can figure out which one I'm talking about. So when I say the pointer, you know, get me the pointer, then you don't know, you have no way to identify which pointer it is, but I'm guessing that you can still find it anyway, and I'm telling you that I think you can find it. So those are the kind of key specific deictics. The non-specific deictics are when you're not really tying it down quite so neatly. You're saying something like each of the pointers, or every pointer, or one of the pointers, or neither pointer, either if you've got more than one. And then sometimes with zero marking. So if you say some cars, a car, all cars, neither coat, either boy, trains, or water. So, you know, if you say there's water on the floor, so that's kind of just making it very non-specific. Which water? It's just, well, there's water there. Trains run every day from here to there. So you can use a general term like that sometimes when you're not specific about which trains you're talking about. So in these cases, they partially or totally specify the thing by reference to part or none of some subset related to the thing. So with each of them, then you probably have a set of, like say I made 5 pizzas and each of them came out perfect. So then when I say each of them, then it refers to each one of that set of 5, or every one of them came out perfect. I could say the same thing, or I could say one of them didn't come out so great. Or if I made 2 pizzas, I could say neither one came out great. Or I could say I've got 2 pizzas, you can eat either of them. It's helping you to talk about some subset of something. And there's another type of deictic which is talked about as a post-deictic or deictic subscript 2 in the textbook. Also appears in a word group and identifies a subset of thing by referring to its familiarity. So this is kind of interesting where when you say, oh, the other book, or the same book, or a different book than that one, or identical to that one. And so by any one of these terms, you're kind of helping, again, even something like, the well-known Dr. Smith or the same two trains, go by every day. The well-known Dr. Smith came and gave a lecture at in our college. So in this case, it does help you to identify which Dr. Smith or which trains. So if you say the same two trains, then it means we've been talking about certain trains. And then when I say the same two trains, again, it helps you to identify which trains I'm talking about, or at least, that particular, in the way of talking about same train. But the well-known Dr. Smith, there may be lots of Dr. Smiths, but if I say, well, the well-known Dr. Smith, then you kind of have an idea that I'm narrowing down who I'm talking about to a particular individual that's well-known. So the principle is basically the same in all of these, is that it's modifying the thing in some way and helping you to narrow down the identification of it. It's not just talking about pointers or cars or whatever, or whoever you're talking about, but helping you to narrow down, because you want to help the hearer to identify what thing you're talking about, right? And so these are going to help you do that. Now, in fact, all of the things we're going to talk about do help you do that. But the key ones are these deictic ones. They are the ones that are really what we think of as identifying. They really nail down which ones you're talking about. Especially, we'll see how the use or non-use of the is really crucial in many contexts. Okay, so then the next one in that long, I'm just going along here like this. So I'm moving from those that are most within the particular context and the most singular identifying towards the least singular identifying, kind of the most general. So the most specific to the most general. So when we talk about the numerative, this is the number or the order of the subset of things. So if we say, I've got one pointer, I got 2 pointers, 3 pointers, or I only have a couple of pointers, or I have a few pointers. By the way, do you know how much couple is? This varies in different English dialects. When you say I have a couple of something, this is totally beside the point. But when I say I have a couple of things, the reason I bring this up is I had an argument with a guy who is from the Midwest in the U.S. one time, when he was talking about couple means two, and I said no, couple can mean many more than two. Originally couple means like couple means to put two things together, so it always means like they're a couple means there's two of them. It's husband and wife. You don't have husband and wife and someone else called a couple, right? So normally couple means two, but in my dialect in New York, where I grew up in New York, couple can mean much more than two. And so I proved it to him. We were talking in New York, so I proved it to him. I took him to a Dunkin' Donuts, and then Dunkin' Donuts, they have these things called donut holes. It's like a little round ball of dough. It's supposed to be the dough that they take out from the middle of the donut. It's just a marketing thing. But anyway, so I walked up to the counter and I said, give me a couple of donut holes. And she gave me 6. So I said to him, see? That's how you do linguistic research. Anyway, that would be a kind of numerative. When you say give me a few of them, give me, I only have a little bit of this left. I only have several of these left. I have many of them. I have much of them. So these are all ways of counting how much of whatever it is you have, or enumerating. It's called enumerative because you're enumerating means you're counting or showing how much you have. But then some of them, they're ordinal. Ordinal just means you're showing the order of them. So the first one, the second one, the third one. So, this was the first one I bought. Then there was the second one that I bought, or he got the first prize, and then there was the second prize for another person. Or with next, last, preceding, subsequent. So next Tuesday, next Thursday we don't have class. So that's the Tuesday after this one. Last Tuesday we had class. Last Thursday we had class. The preceding Thursday we didn't have class, right? Anyway, whatever. And then the subsequent week means the one following that. So you can say like 2 trains, many trains, the next train, the first train. And these are summarized in the table 6.5 in the reading. Now, Halliday sees the numeratives as separate from the non-specific deictics. But Thompson, if you've been reading Thompson, he argues that the numeratives can be included in the non-specific deictics. So even within this theory, you know, this is a very open theory. Somebody actually asked in the slips, the 2 slips, who gave Halliday the right to come up with all these names and to develop this theory? I thought that was a very interesting question. Nobody ever asked that question before. This is a very open theory. Anybody can, you know, give their opinion. So Thompson was a student of Halliday. He died recently, Thompson. Halliday's still alive, but Thompson died recently, unfortunately. He's a very nice guy. And he, his book actually came out after he died, I think. But the second edition, this is the first edition. But you know, within Halliday's group, he's very happy to have people disagree with him and try to develop the theory on their own. So he encourages people to disagree with him and say, okay, no, we should do it this way, we should do it that way. And his students have really taken the theory and run with it, and they've developed it in all kinds of different ways and applied it to, you know, as I mentioned, I think they applied it to things outside language. So they look at, you know, different aspects of behavior. They also look at architecture. They also look at art. They look at many different things and try to apply the same principles in looking at many different things. And Halliday loves that. In fact, the thing he most dislikes is when someone just takes the system that he developed for English and just applies it blindly to another language. I was with him at a conference in Guangzhou one time, and there was one person who did that, and he was so disappointed because, you know, you don't do that. You have to, everything, you know, a lot of people have been asking, like, what if it's this kind of language or that kind of language? Well, it's all based on the language. It's not based on the theory. You're not just forcing the language into the theory. You're developing the theory out of the language. You know, the theory comes from the description. So whatever the language is, so somebody asked, you know, how would you analyze, why you so sway one, you know, or something like that. So then, you know, think about how would you do it. You know, you could use a lot of the same basic ideas like, you know, textual function, interpersonal function, metafunction, and ideational function, but it will work differently for each language. Each language is unique. So the way that you would analyze it would be based on the actual texts of the language. It's all, you know, this is very, you know, what we call inductive, you know, so you're working from the facts of the languages themselves. And so, like, I don't really work in this theory, but Michael Halliday invited me to this conference. The reason I was at that conference, it was the Congress of the Systemic Functional Linguistics Conference. The reason why he invited me, because he wanted me to stir things up, he said, because I have opinions about things that other people don't have. And so I came in there and started telling them stuff that, you know, kind of trying to shake them up a little bit. So like I was telling them that, for example, that topic and comment is different from theme and rime. They're 2 different functional structures, and they need to, you know, deal with that. So, you know, Michael is like that. And whereas some people, though, like, say, Chomsky or Robert Van Balen or some of these other people who have theories that they've developed, they're very possessive of the theory, and they don't allow anybody else to get involved in, you know, they don't give anybody the authority or the autonomy to change anything in the theory. So there is, within linguistics, these different types of people, different types of thing. In the 1980s, a lot of theories developed because people thought that Noam Chomsky's theory wasn't working, so they wanted to become the next Noam Chomsky. And so they tried to create their own theories, and then they were very much identified with a single person, and that person kind of controlled it. So Joan Breslin, LFG, Roland Reference Grammar, there's Van Balen, you had Ivan Sag with HPSG. So there's many kinds of theories that developed. And those are really very limited because, you know, it's all up to this kind of one person to decide everything. And then when that person, if that person dies, then the theory dies, you know. So, and Chomsky never allowed anybody else the authority to change anything in his theory. How did I get talking about that? Oh, yeah, because somebody asked about how does he have authority. Anybody can come up with any kind of theory, but in particular, Michael was just trying to solve problems. He was trying to figure out initially a Chinese text called The Secret History of the Mongols. He was trying to figure out why it worked the way it worked. And so he started to create the theory in order to understand that Chinese text, and then later applied that way of thinking, not exactly the same analysis, but the way of thinking about text to English, and then came up with the analysis that we're talking about. Now, this has been applied to many, many other languages, and I can give you a paper, actually, that does a survey of talking about all the different languages that it's been applied to. But it's just we're talking about, this class is supposed to be the structure of English, so that's why I'm not talking about other languages. But this theory could be used for any language, any type of language. Now, the next one is epithet, which just means something that you're talking about the quality of it. Now, it could be an objective quality, like you know, it's old or it's new, or it could be a subjective quality, like wonderful or beautiful or something like that. And sometimes it can also be, instead of an adjective, it can be a verb, like the broken chair, you know, or something like that, where it's the participle form or the en form or ing form of a verb. So when you have a property, there's two types. There's the property type, which is kind of the actual kind of more objective type. These are these can have an identifying, a defining function or identifying function. So when you say the old shoes, you know, if I'm telling you which shoes to get, I can say, get me the old shoes, where the old here is helping you to identify shoes. Now, of course, for a defining function, as I mentioned, the use of the is important. So I can't say, just get me old shoes, because then I'm not telling you which old shoes. If I say the old shoes, then I'm telling you that you can identify the shoes, and you can identify them partly because they're old. Or if I say, so old shoes is not defining, the old shoes is defining, the long dress is defining. If you say a long dress, then it's not defining. It's any dress that's long. But still, it helps to narrow down what kind of dress you're talking about. So you're not talking about a short dress, you're talking about a long dress. Fast cars, a galloping horse, an ongoing sail. So in this case, you know, something that's ongoing. So here's you have a verb or a galloping horse, also a verb modifying it. But it's the ing form of the verb. This is actually a noun form, so it can be used as a modifier here. Now, the other type is attitudinal. So this is part of the interpersonal meaning when the speaker is giving the kind of subjective take on it. So when you say the splendid lunch or those wonderful clothes, so these can't be defining. I can't say, bring me the wonderful clothes, where you're going to know which ones I think of as wonderful or not wonderful. Or, you know, fantastic story. So I can say he told me a fantastic story, but only in certain contexts would you say the fantastic story. If we had already been talking about there was some stories, one story that was fantastic and there was another story that wasn't fantastic, then you could really use it in a defining kind of way. Now, it's the attitudinal ones normally come before the property ones. So when you say like those lovely two white flowers, normally because there's a principle in the order of these things that the more inherent characteristic is closer to the thing. So white is more characteristic or more part of the nature of flowers than there being two of them or them being lovely. And the same thing like with an arch, being tall is more part of the nature of the arch than being splendid is. So again, it's the closer to the thing, the more inherent to the nature of the thing itself. The farther away, the more it's just the specific interaction going on at that point. And so we're actually going to be talking about, I should have started with this, we're actually going to be talking about the same three metafunctions, the textual, the interpersonal, and the experiential, but instead of separating them as three lines, it's all just one line. But the different elements have these things. So this has a textual function. The whole order of these things has a textual function, but this is very much like theme. And then you have, when you have this kind of interpersonal epithet, then that has like an interpersonal function. And then the experiential function is many of the other more objective aspects of the thing. Now, the last part before the thing, we're calling classifier in this theory, but it's not like classifier in Chinese when you say like, san ben shu, where the ben is a classifier. That's talked about as a numeral classifier, a noun classifier. In this theory, the classifier that we're talking about in Chinese linguistics is sometimes called a 区别词, or a differentiating word, because it helps you to differentiate a subclass of the thing, its material, the scale or scope or purpose and function, the status and rank, the origin, the mode of operation, something that can be used to classify the set of things. So if you say something like electric train as opposed to steam train, as opposed to, what other kind of trains are there? There are not that many. So the idea with the classifier is it's usually a small set that you choose from. So I can say a wooden table, a metal table, plastic table. What else could you have? Almost anything, whatever you could make a table out of. Stone table, maybe. Or, like wooden bowl, toy car. So you have a real car versus a toy car. A marble table. Oh, you could have a marble table. Yeah. Express bus versus the slow bus or the local bus. The Fifth Avenue train as opposed to the 7th Avenue train or something like that. A traveling salesman as opposed to a salesman who sits in his office and does his sales from the office. And spoken language as opposed to written language. So in many cases, you don't have a lot of choices there. It's only like maybe 2. Or actually, we have sign language, so we have 3. So you got spoken language, written language, and sign language. And so with the classifier, it's very different from the epithet. They sometimes are confused, but in this case, it's narrowing it down to a certain subclass of the thing in a much more restricted way than the epithet is. They differ from the epithets in that they don't take adverbs of degree or comparison. So if you say, like the old calendar, you can say very old calendar, or very old table, but you can't say the very wooden table, or the very metal table, or the very glass table, or the very traveling salesman, or the very spoken language, or the very electric train. So they're very different in that sense. So in one way, we talk about them as modifiers, but they're very different kind of modifiers than the epithets. Now, the thing is, like with everything in this theory, there's no fine line, there's no clear, distinct line between classifier and thing and a fully lexicalized noun. So in some cases, you have historically, this development from what was originally a classifier plus noun, and then it later just becomes a single word. So originally we had database, which was a base of data. And then we had database with a hyphen, so you say it a little differently. So this was a database, this is a database, and now you just have database as one thing, right? So we don't even think of database as a base with data, which is what it was originally. Or field work, we now also was work that you did in the field originally, and it was 2 separate things with a classifier, field work as opposed to office work. And now we just say field work as one thing. So historically, over time, a lot of times these classifiers end up becoming merged with the thing into a single lexical item, a single word. And so there's no hard and fast line between those two. And very often, historically, we end up going through these stages where we write them as separate words, then we write them as hyphenated, then we write them as one word. And a lot of times when you're writing, you don't know whether you should hyphenate or not, because you have to kind of say it aloud to yourself and think how far along it's gotten in that process. Okay, so that's the major things aside from the thing itself. And the order of the elements, as I mentioned, it parallels the order of the clause in having the deictic in the initial position, just like the theme is an initial position in the clause. And the rest of it relates the rest of the expression to the speech event, or it relates the rest of it to the speech event. And the order of elements is from the greatest potential for specifying the identity. In other words, identifying a specific one, like, you know, this in you know, this black pointer, and then going down to the least specifying potential. So if I say plastic pointer or plastic chair, then that's not really helping you to identify which specific chair or pointer it is. At the same time, the order is from the least permanent attributes. If you're going from classifier to deictic, the classifier is the most permanent to, you know, the epithets to the deictic. When you go in that direction, it's from the most inherent or permanent characteristics towards the other side. Or if you look at it from this way, it's from least permanent attributes to the most permanent attributes. So, and this is also true when you have more than one epithet, because you're going to have a number of different epithets. And when you do, the order is going to be the same in the sense of, it's going to be kind of regulated in the sense that those things that are more inherent to the nature of the thing you're talking about, so like blue chair is more general and more inherent in the nature of the chair than it being new. So you wouldn't say a blue new chair, right? You would say a new blue chair. And this pattern is pretty much found in other languages as well, although other languages won't have them in this order. They put it after the head, like in Malay, right? So in Malay, you have the same order basically, but it's just reversed. So it's like you took these and just flipped them over. So it's a pretty standard kind of thing in languages that you have this principle of ordering from, you know, the closest to this is going to be the most inherent to the nature of that thing. And then whether you go out from this direction or you go out from that direction, it's basically the same principle towards the more specifying, right? How many people here speak Malay? Not too many, huh? Okay, so that didn't help. But you'll notice, like you say, like, they see gosong beng, right? So you have the tea first, then you have, you know, no sugar, and then you have iced, right? So the no sugar is more inherent to the nature of the tea, and then whether it's cold or not is less inherent to the nature of it. So it follows the same principle, but it's just going the opposite direction. Now it's kind of weird that in many cases you do this even with Chinese words like de and beng, but whatever. It's just the way things are ordered in Malay. So that's why a lot of times you have these things that you, you know, the ordering is a little bit strange. Okay, now in terms of the logical, is there, what's going on? So now you understand why the ordering is the way it is. And you can add others. You say gao, gao go song bang. So gao is thick, right? So or heavy ho. So it comes before the others because it's more inherent. So in terms of logical structure, you have a recurrence of the same function. That is, the elements to the left of the head are all modifiers. And that's what I meant here. So this is the head we talk about as alpha, or A, and then you have B, G, D, E, and Z. And so the idea of this is that you have, this is the thing being modified, this is modifying this, and this is modifying both of those, this is modifying those two, and this is modifying all of these, and this is modifying all of those. So if we look at it this way, so each of them subcategorize or modify the one before it in the head. So we say it's recursive, just means it's, you know, kind of repeated. And univariate just means it's going in the same way. So in each case, you know, A is a subset of X. And then, so when you have, like the example, those three beautiful old wall calendars, you're going from calendars to wall calendars. You're asking what type of calendar? Well, wall calendar. What quality of wall calendar? Wall calendar. Old walled calendars. This is really going to be difficult. Which quality of old wall calendars? Beautiful old wall calendars. how many beautiful old wall calendars? 3 beautiful old wall calendars. I got to change this example next time. Which 3 beautiful old wall calendars? Those 3 beautiful old wall calendars. So, you know, you can see how it's kind of built up with each layer modifying the one before it. So in this case, we're just asking what kind of calendar. In this case, what kind of wall calendars. In this case, what kind of old wall calendars. In this case, what kind of beautiful old wall calendars, or how many beautiful old wall calendars. Whoops, stop doing that. And then which of these beautiful old wall, 3 beautiful old wall calendars, those 3 beautiful old wall calendars. So you can see how it's just this continuous extension of modification where each layer modifies everything that comes before it. Now, a little bit of a wrinkle to this, or you know, a kind of tricky bit, is that sometimes we have sub-modifier. So if we look at something like a rather more impressive figure, figure is the head, or the thing. I should have put figure, head, thing. Head is, well, in this case, it's the thing. So they're not exactly the same, and I'll explain that in a minute. But here we talk about this as the thing, and then these are all modifiers. But this isn't the same kind of. We don't say it's an impressive figure and then more impressive figure, or rather more impressive figure. But this is like a sub-modifier. So it's this whole thing, rather more impressive, is one modifier modifying the figure, and then is modifying this whole bit. So you have this sub-modification where the impressive is modified by more impressive, and then rather modifies more and more impressive. So it's an impressive figure, a more impressive or figure, or a rather more impressive figure. But these aren't really modifying figure the way that the other ones are. This is modifying more impressive, and this is modifying impressive. So it's something just to keep an eye out for. Okay, let's take a break first, and then I'll come back and do the post modifier, the qualifier. Can you guys over here see this? Or should I turn it more? It's okay? I'm afraid if I turn it, it'll get all messed up again. But so that's why I asked first. Okay. So aside from those modifiers that come in front of the thing or come before the thing, there's also modifiers that can come after the thing, and these we call post modifier because it comes after, post meaning after, or qualifier because it qualifies which thing you're talking about. And these qualifiers are either a reduced clause or relative clause or a prepositional phrase, and it modifies it in a particular way that it's rank shifted. Remember we talked about the ranks. You have clause, group, and phrase, and then word, and then morpheme. So when we say rank shifted, it means it went from one rank to another. So clause is normally at the clause level, but sometimes they're rank shifted, which means they're actually not at the clause level. So like this one, the book that I got from the library, so I got from the library is a full clause, but in this case, it's not acting as a clause at the clause rank, at the clause level. It's been rank shifted, it's been moved from the clause level, well, not really moved, but anyway, we're putting it in the noun group. It's actually part of the noun group. So it's part of the constituent. If you remember the exercise we did last time when I looked at Hemingway in lecture, and we had these very complex noun groups, that's because he had a lot of these post qualifiers on it. So he had whole clauses modifying the nouns that he was talking about. So the rank of clause was pretty simple in that structure, but within the noun groups he had rank shifted clauses, which made the noun groups look complicated. So these things are within the noun group rather than a constituent at the clause level. Sometimes they talk about as embedded. In other words, it's stuck inside something else. That's the idea of embedded. It's something that's not normally stuck inside, getting stuck inside. So in this case, when you say the book that I got from the library, this is what we call a restrictive relative clause or a defining relative clause, because it's telling you specifically which book, the book that I got from the library. So this helps you to identify which book it is. So that's why it's called restrictive. It restricts the identification of the thing, or defining helps you to define which one, and either expression is okay. Now that's different from a non-defining or non-restrictive relative clause where if I say something like, my brother who just came back from Chicago is arriving today. In that case, who just came back from Chicago is not within the noun group. That's actually operating at the clause level, and it's not helping you to define who my brother is. It's just telling you more information about my brother that I'm treating as not so important. We'll talk about that type later when we get to above the clause or clause juncture. But in this case, these are the ones that are embedded within the noun group are defining type or restrictive relatives. Now it can either be a clause or it can be a preposition phrase. Again, you can see the similarity because as we say preposition phrases are reduced clauses. So it's and you could replace this with the man who has a big nose. So you could use a clause or you could use with the big nose. Either one, the meaning is very similar, and you can see the relationship between the preposition phrases and clauses. So or the car coming down the street. So in this case, in this one you have a finite clause because you have the past tense marked here. But in this one, coming down the street, there's no finite element, and so it's a non-finite clause. Basically what we call a kind of becomes like a noun. In this case, still modifying the car. But you could also make that finite if you wanted to and say the car which is coming down the street, where you include the subject and the finite. And so in this case, it's a full clause. And the marking that I'm using here is when it's got single brackets like this, like in this one, single brackets, that means it's a preposition phrase. In the double brackets, like this one, it means it's a clause, an embedded clause. There's some cases where noun groups can also be qualifiers, like this is where our surnames come from very often. Like when you say Bill the Smith, the name Bill Smith or John Carpenter came from Bill the Smith or Bill the Carpenter, the guy who's a carpenter, John, that guy who's a carpenter, became John Carpenter, or John who's a smith. Smith is a guy who works with metal, right? Like a metalsmith, we call it. And so the name Smith comes from somebody who originally was working with metal, and so they identified him by calling him John the Smith, or just John Smith. Or Leonardo da Vinci. How many people know that Leonardo da Vinci is not his surname? Because people didn't have surnames in those days. At least common people didn't. His name is actually Leonardo of Vinci. The is just Italian for of. So he's, which Leonardo? The Leonardo who lived in Vinci. It's just a place name. So, but it came to be our way of identifying which Leonardo. There could be lots of Leonardos. So we say the Leonardo of Vinci. So it became Leonardo da Vinci, or, von Beethoven, or all of these. A lot of the surnames, European surnames, are just place names, or mostly place names, where you have, even my name, LaPolla, is a place name near Naples. Or my brother, the lawyer, you can use a noun as a post-qualifier, post-modifier, like when you say my brother, the lawyer, as opposed to my brother, the beer maker, something like that. So here's how we analyze them. We have the thing, and then you would have your deictic and any other modifiers that come before the thing over here, and then the qualifier comes after it. And again, you have the same type of relationship where you have the A or alpha marking the main thing being modified, and then this is one modifier, and this is a separate modifier, just going in different directions. And then this, because it's a complex phrase itself, it's a reduced clause, so we can analyze the preposition as a kind of process, and then the complement. This is the complement of the process. We can call this a type of range, because it's not being really affected by the process, so we just consider this a type of range. And within that, you have a noun group. This is a noun group, the big nose. So that can be analyzed as your thing, the epithet modifying the thing, and then the deictic modifying the epithet and thing. So you can see how this structures, even though it seems like we're talking about a lot of different structures, it's really a lot of repetition. There's the same kind of principles and the same kind of analysis is used at different levels. So instead of saying, a clausal process and then complement, or, where the complement may be arranged like sing a song, here we're talking about the process being a preposition phrase and the complement being the complement of the preposition phrase rather than the complement of a verb. But it's the same principle, basically, and that's why we consider this a minor process. And then the modification is just a matter of, two different directions. So in some languages like Chinese, the modification is almost always to one direction, whereas in English we can go both directions. So we can have modifiers hanging off both sides of the thing, whereas in Chinese you would pile them all up in front, and in other languages you might pile them all after the thing. It just depends on the language and the speakers, what they want to do with it. And, or in some languages, like in French, sometimes you put the epithet before the noun, sometimes you put the epithet after the noun. That's the way they want to do it. So, I'm not going to stop them. So you kind of have to go with whatever the language does, whatever the speakers do. The languages don't do anything. Language is just something that appears out of the interaction of speakers. So it's the speakers who are doing it. It's just human behavior. And so there's all kinds of historical reasons and whatnot for why languages aren't very consistent. But there is something, some larger principles that we can identify that are common among languages. And so we try to, do what we can in terms of making sense of the languages. As I mentioned when I was talking about the Halliday, the Hemingway example, very often in writing, the clause structure is simple, and especially in academic writing, the clause structure is simple, mostly relational processes, where this is this, this is that, and kind of thing, while the group structure is complex. So here I've used curly brackets to mark clausal constituents and square brackets to mark group or phrase internal constituents. So you say, like, this is a different example of how the structure of languages is significant in understanding how the written language works. So the clause structure says this is one, this is something, right? And then all of the something is a different example of how the structure of language is significant in understanding how the written language works. All of that is just one noun group, right? So this is typical of writing. We don't normally talk that way. People would maybe get confused. So this, this is one, where the one, or this is something, and then, so this is a major clausal constituent, this is a major clausal constituent, and this whole thing from here to there is one clausal constituent. But within that, we have a different example. We have the thing is example, and then this is the post-deictic. It's a different example. This is your non-specific deictic, and then you have these post-modifiers. It's of how the structure of languages is significant, and then you have a modifier of that in understanding how the written language, so you have modifiers of modifiers of modifiers within that layer as well. So, but this is all considered one noun group. And if you want to be able to read well, you have to be able to figure out where these constituent boundaries are and understand what's modifying what. Because if you get it wrong, then there are a lot of cases where it's ambiguous out of context, what's modifying what. And when you do the tutorials, you'll see that. Or going back to our original first tutorial, given that the presidential authority includes the power to send troops abroad, having a law that says Congress must approve all declarations of war does not stop the president from involving the U.S. in foreign conflicts. That's actually reduced, is just given this, having that does not stop him from that. Whereas each of these, this and that, is very complex noun groups. So you can see how complicated this can be. And again, this is typical of writing, but we wouldn't necessarily talk that way. Normally when we talk, we use simpler groups and phrases, but more complex interrelations between the clauses, which we'll talk about more next time. What's interesting is in some cases, the post modifier in some cases is not actually modifying the head or the thing, but it's modifying a modifier. So when you say a better man than I am, actually the then I am is not modifying the man than I am, it's really better than I am. So it's a man who is better than I am. You can say a better man than I am. So in this case, the then I am is actually modifying better than man. So that's a little tricky bit. Again, language isn't internally consistent and logical in all cases. We just do whatever we want to do, and that gets conventionalized, and you got to live with it. Or the brightest star in the sky, where what's really saying is the star that's brightest in the sky, or which is brightest in the sky. But you don't need to mark that in the structure. So just as long as you understand that the meaning is that way, you would still mark it in the structure in this same way. Okay, now I've been kind of vacillating between head and thing. Head and thing are actually different things. The head is a structural, grammatical key element of the structure. It's the key grammatical element of the structure, whereas the thing is the key semantic element of the structure. So the thing is what you're talking, what you are talking about, whereas the head most of the time is the same as the thing, but it's not always. So sometimes you have a division. So the head of the modifying structure is usually the thing, but not always. So in some cases there is no thing. This is why I had to take back what I said earlier. So you can say these three, where you can leave off the thing altogether. So if we're talking about, pointers, and I say, well, take these three and leave those two here. So then I don't have to have the thing there at all, because we know what we're talking about. Or I could say, take the smallest one. If I know we're talking about, we've got 4 pizzas there, and I say, well, you take the smallest one. Or, which of those, you can say just which by itself, I want you to take those, and you say which, or, which one. Or ones would actually be the head. But, or those, you can just say those by itself without anything. And In some cases, the thing and the head may be different constituents, with the head being a non-specific deictic, enumerative, or an epithet, or a classifier. So when you say a kind of tree, then the head is actually the measure or the type thing here. The grammatical head is kind. So you say a kind of tree, where this is of, you can see is a preposition phrase, of tree, or 3 cups of coffee, it's in a preposition phrase. So it's actually a post-modifier grammatically of the head, which is cups. So 3 cups of coffee, or 4 sticks of gum, or 3 types of noun, another one of my friends, some of that chicken pie, 3 of the survivors, that idiot of a manager. So all of these are, you have like in 3 cups of coffee, the cups is the head, so that's the thing that's actually being modified. And then the thing, though, is it shows up in the post-modifier. And so this is really an interesting aspect of English. Not all languages do this, but most languages don't do this. They don't separate it like this. It's just consistently the head and the thing are the same. But in this case, we separate this. Now, what's interesting about this is that it explains, when we understand this difference between thing and head, it explains why we can say a strong cup of coffee when the word strong is put after like if I say 3 strong cups of coffee, I can put strong in front of cups. Even though what's strong is not the cup is strong, you know, it's the coffee that's strong. I can also say 3 cups of strong coffee. So the reason why I can do it either way is because from a semantic point of view, I'm modifying coffee, so I can put it in front of coffee. From a grammatical point of view, I want to modify the head, because that's the main thing being modified, so I can put it in front of there. Now, so it's the only theory that can explain why you can say that. Why do we have this strange phenomenon where you can say 3 strong cups of coffee, but you can't say 3 blue cups of coffee, even though this is the head. You can't actually modify this in the sense of like, blue cups of coffee. You could say 3 large cups of coffee, so you can modify it in terms of size. So you can say 3 large cups of coffee, where what you're modifying here is cups. But yeah, you wouldn't do it with, say, 3 blue cups of coffee or something like that. But then like the strong, you can put it in front of coffee, you can put it here. And this is the only theory that has a way of explaining why you can do that. So that's quite important and useful. One of the things about this, by the way, is because this is a modifier, you'll notice that when there's a plural, the plural comes on the head. You don't say 3 cups of coffees. You say 3 cups of coffee. And the reason why you do that is modifiers are not, it's not really the specific thing you're talking about. It's what we call non-referential. It's not referring to anything. And so it's never going to be plural. So that's why when you say like 3 types of coffee, you wouldn't say 3 types of coffees. You say 3 types of coffee. Or you wouldn't say 3 types of coffees or something like that. Or 3 cups of coffees. The plural comes on the head because it's the head that's grammatically the main thing going on here. And so that's where the plural ends up. There's a general principle of English that modifiers are not pluralized. I've noticed here that a lot of people will, they're not aware of that rule, and so they'll say something like a 24-hour ATM. They'll say 24 hours ATM, right? But because 24-hour ATM, 24-hour is modifying ATM, when it's a modifier, you never make it plural. You would never say 24 hours ATM in American English or British English or Australian English. So just remember that rule. Whenever it's a modifier, it's not plural. It's going to be, there are a few exceptions, but I'm not going to get into that. Everything has exceptions. All grammars leak. But there's a general principle that normally when it's a modifier, in this case, in a post-modifier, but also when it's a pre-modifier, then it's always going to be in the non-plural form. Okay. So as I mentioned, the interpersonal meanings are embodied in the person system, the pronouns and the possessive. So when I say my pointer or my brother or or when I just say me, give it to me, right? So if the noun group is just one word, me, then that's interpersonal and in a way also because it's identifying the speaker. And the attitudinal type of epithet, so when I say, a lovely chocolate cake, then the lovely part is not really telling you something about the cake other than my personal subjective opinion of it. So that's interpersonal very much. And then there's also connotative meanings of words. So very often when you talk, you have the choice of different words to kind of represent the same meaning, but one will have a more negative connotation, one will have a more positive connotation. When you use like, say for example, when we're talking about people fighting in a war, I can use the term terrorist or I can use the word freedom fighter. I may be talking about the same exact person, but it just depends on your personal interpretation of your support or non-support for that person. So, depending on what side you're on in Syrian conflict, for example, you might call somebody a terrorist or a freedom fighter. So that's actually interpersonal, an expression of your interpersonal subjective opinion about the conflict and, the people involved in it. And also the prosodic features such as swear words and voice quality. So, like when you say, the damn TV's broken again, so that damn, that's also this interpersonal thing that, it shows up in the structure of the group, but it's not there, it's not really helping you to identify the TV, it's just giving that interpersonal meaning about the TV. And voice quality just means, how you say words is going to depend, the way you say it is going to influence how people understand how you mean it. And the textual meaning is embodied throughout the entire structure since it determines the order in which the elements are arranged. So the fact that we don't have a lot of freedom in the order of elements, except for these attitudinal epithets, they can move around a little bit. But for the experiential aspect, you don't have a lot of freedom in terms of the order, but the order is meaningful. So, so the difference between the clause level and the group level is not that the order of elements isn't meaningful, it's just that the clause level you have more freedom to move things around. At the clause level it's also meaningful because like we said, the closer it is to the beginning of the noun group, the more identifying it is, and the closer it is to the end of the noun group, the more kind of classifying it is. And so it just so happens that in the noun group, at least in English, other languages aren't necessarily like this. There are languages where you can break up the elements of a noun group in many different places. They're called non-configurational languages. Like an Australian language is called Dirbal or Yidni. There's a language called Yidni also, or Walpiri. These are languages where you don't have to have them all together in one group. But languages like English and Chinese and whatnot, the elements of a noun group always come together. And the order of them is fixed in this. It doesn't mean that it's not meaningful. It's still meaningful. So we have this. So we have this order of modification, and depending on the type of depending on the type of modification, whether it's a classifier, epithet, or numerative or deictic, then the order is going to be fixed. And so it will depend on the meaning of the element. So the order is meaningful, and then having it in that particular order will give you a particular meaning. So when you use it, in some cases you might, there may be, the same word may appear in different places, but depending on how you understand it, whether you understand it as epithet or a classifier, it may give you a different sense of what you're talking about. So it is meaningful still. And the patterns of information structure, English not so much, but in other languages you have freedom to move, like in Tagalog, if you say beautiful woman, you have a choice between saying babaeng maganda or magandang babae, where you have the woman beautiful or beautiful woman, and the information structure, in other words, which is kind of the more important information, determines which comes first and which comes second. So some languages do that. English not so much, but it depends on the language. Languages differ quite a bit, and so each language as I said, each language is unique, and so as you approach the language, you have to be kind of open to all these possibilities. Unfortunately, a lot of linguists, they're stuck in one way of seeing language, basically English, and then when they look at other languages, they try to force that language into an English-like structure. But languages differ quite a bit from each other, and so when you do look at other languages, you have to be flexible. You have to be open to different possibilities, things you may never have seen before, like non-configurational, where the elements of a noun group are spread all over the place, and or ordering based on information structure. Okay, any questions about the noun group before we move on to the verbal group, the verb group? Someone asked during the break, by the way, about how you distinguish between epithet and classifier. So just think in terms of how classifying it is. In other words, with the classifier, it's only going to be a restricted set of possibilities. And very often, if you have, you can test it by putting, like, say, old or say round. He was asking about a round table. Is that a classifier, an epithet? Well, that would be an epithet, because a classifier would be like a metal table, or a marble table, or a stone table, whatever. And then you could say a round marble table or a round metal table, but you wouldn't say a metal round table. Well, you could, but that's not the normal way we say it. So everything is possible, but it's just marked and unmarked, So normally the epithet will come before the classifier, and there are some expressions, some exceptions, like in Cantonese, sometimes you can say, instead of saying lean pork meat, you can say pork lean meat. But that's kind of a weird thing, because in Cantonese, when you say lean meat, you actually mean pork. So it's kind of like when you say pork lean meat, it's kind of redundant, saying like pork. But anyway, there are some exceptions sometimes, but generally the rules is going to be the epithet before the classifier. Any questions, comments? Okay, the verbal group is the same kind of thing, where you have one element that's kind of the heart of it, which in the case of this, because we're talking about processes, we're going to be calling this the event. So in this case, the eat is the predicator, and so we're talking about the event being the core of the main meaning of the verbal group, just like the thing is the main meaning of the noun group. So the total verbal group can be made up, though, of the finite plus the predicator and all of the other elements that can go in there in terms of modifying these two. So the finite, again, the same principle that we saw at the clause level and at the noun group level is followed in the verb group level, where the finite comes first, because, again, the finite is like the deictic. Finite actually is deictic. So deictic is, as I mentioned, is anything that you understand relative to the time of speaking, the person of speaking, or the place of speaking. So with the deictic, it was place of speaking. With the finite, it's the time of speaking. So the finite is marking the time of the event relative to the time of speaking. So this is, again, identifying it relative to the current speech act situation, just like the deictic in the noun group is identifying it to the current speaker or the place of the speaker. And then all of the other things are relative to that. So whatever tense this is, whether it is present, past, or future, then everything else is going to be relative to that. And so you can have a very simple noun verb group like ate, where the finite and the event are just in one word. And then when we when we analyze it, I just draw a line between it and I say finite and then predicator in the interpersonal analysis. But in some of them, we can have a very complicated thing. Now, English is kind of unusual in having this very full-blown system. Now, most theories will talk about these as aspect marking. They will only talk about this one as tense and the rest as aspect. Halliday talks about this as primary tense, and these are all secondary tense. So when you read this, you know, it couldn't have been going to be eaten. There's kind of this past, present, future going back and forth through it. And I'll give you an example. So the logical structure of the verb group realizes the system of tense. And it's really important in English that every finite clause, this is the definition of a finite clause, is that it has tense. It has a finite element. That's why we call it the finite element, because it's helping to make the clause finite. And finite just means it's restricted to a certain time relative to the time of speaking. So the finite marks the primary or deictic tense. Again, it's deictic because it's relative to the time of speaking. And so that's past, present, or future. And then any modifying elements are secondary tense, like have plus the verb and en, or present with be plus ing, or future with be going to, relative to the time selected by the tense. So if you say eats, then you just have present tense. If you say has eaten, then you've got this, the have, where the present tense is marked on have rather than on the verb eat itself. But then you have this secondary past tense marking, has eaten. So this is actually present tense, but then this marks it as past tense. So you got present and past together. And this one, you've got the present and past and then present again with the be and ing. And then you have the future. So was is past, be going to is future, this is past, and this is present. So we can talk about this as, you know, it's present. We start with the back. So it's present, in past, in future, in past. Now, I don't know how non-native speakers learn this. It's impossible to learn. But we talk like this all the time, and we don't even think about it. So you can say, yeah, he was going to have been working, but he didn't. Now, does that make sense to anybody? It does to us. So when you say he was going to have been working, the reason why it's called past, present in past and future in past is because so the idea is you have a scenario where the person is supposed to be working now, so that's present, and he, at some point in the past, he was about to be working. So that's why it's past in present in past, in future in past. So that didn't make any sense, did it? Okay. So was going to have been working. So you say a guy, I hired a guy to work for me, and then we said he was going to start working today, right? And then somebody came in and told me, you know, was looking for the guy, but the guy never showed up. So I said, well, he was going to have been working today. Meaning, at some point in the past, we decided that he should be working today, and that was something that was in the past because now it's not true. So, as I said, if you're not a native speaker, give up on this. It's like, I don't know. But it can actually get more complicated than that. And if you read Halliday's section, which maybe we're not going to get too far into this, because it's really difficult. But the idea is basically not that difficult. If you just look here, we have, whenever it's have and plus n, it equals past. Whenever it's be plus ing, it's present. Whenever it's be plus going to, it's future. And so then you can, so you have this, he marks it with this minus for past, plus for future, and 0 for present. So if we start here, we have present in past, in future, in past, because the modificational relationship. Okay, so let's try some examples. So the letter came, so that's past relation to now, right? So now is now, and then it came means it came sometime before the time of speaking, so that's past in relation to now. But after I'd left is past in relation to that point. So the letter came sometime before now, and then after I had left is before that time. So that's past in past. When you say the car has left, that's past and present, because right now we have present tense on here, but has left, have left is kind of marking a past tense. So this is past and present. So right now there is a situation that the car is not here. So we say has, which is present tense, left is past tense. So, or the car had left, which is past and past. So at some time in the past the car had left, but now it's back again. So that situation no longer holds. So it's past. The had is past tense, right? Has is present, had is past. These are both past. So this is present with past, past with past. The car is leaving is present in present because you have is present and leaving is present. Whereas if you say was leaving, then that's past with present because this is past tense and this is present tense. So at some time in the past it was leaving, or you could have said it is leaving, or she's been crying since you left, where you have present is, this is the is, and in this is also present, and then you have the past in the present, because has been, she has been crying, and then she had clearly been crying, where you have present crying in past, and then past again. So it's just a matter of identifying the verb form. So whenever you have ing, it's present. Whenever you have, like was or had, it's past tense. And then if you have going to, then it's present tense. In other theories, going to would be called prospective aspect, but in this theory, we just call it future secondary tense. Now, sometimes we use the past as a kind of distance, where you say, like, I wish I knew some French, where it's not really past tense. It just shows that there's a distance between you and French. I don't know any French, and it's kind of far from me. Or if I had a hammer means I don't have a hammer, where the had doesn't mean really past tense. It's not like I had it and I don't have it now. It's just kind of, I'm distant from the hammer. And then future can be a kind of modality, as we talked about earlier. Will and will can be either seen as modality or as future. And then in the passive, we also have, he treats passive as actually a part of the whole tense system. So it's, these are all related. So when you say, I had been rudely awakened, so the awakened is passive, and then you have past and past again. So you have the passive with past and past. Or the car was being washed at that time. So washed again is passive, being is present, and then was is past. The pigs are being prepared for slaughter. Prepared is passive, being is present, and are is present. So you just look at the tense marking on the words. And then modality, I ought to be happy. This is with instead of using tense, we use modality. So I ought to be happy, you must be joking, I could have been shot, she should have come, she could have been going to rush out. So here you have the modality plus secondary tense. And this modulated and modalized just means these are modality of obligation, and these are the modality of how certain you are of something, the epistemic, what we call epistemic modality. Okay, Now, another little tricky thing in English, but it's kind of an interesting aspect that some people have brought up in their questions, is these phrasal verbs. We use a lot of phrasal verbs in English. And there are three kinds where you have a verb plus an adverb, like look up or search out or see off or call off or ring up. Or you have a verb plus a preposition, like look for, seek out. No, that would be the top one. Then verb plus adverb plus preposition, like look out for, be up on, put in for, put up to. And these things form a single process, but it's separable. So some people ask, can a process be more than one word and can they be separated? And this is a case where it is. So these things, when you say called off the meeting, this is really one process to call off, but the off is actually an adjunct, and then it takes a goal. So it's not, in these cases, when you say I'm looking for a book, it's not really for a book. You wouldn't say, you know, a book is what, you would say a book is what I'm looking for. You wouldn't say for a book is what I'm looking. That sounds weird. So by doing that kind of moving things around, you can see whether it's a preposition phrase or it's a one of these type of phrasal verbs. Now, the reason why we have these is, well, this is a long thing. I'm not going to go into this. You can read this when you get time. But basically, the idea is the same that we talked about before. When you normally when you're talking, you put the new information at the end of the clause. Again, it's the same principles we're seeing all over and over again. And so when we want to have the new information at the end of the clause, we have two competing kind of tendencies in English. Normally, the verb is in the middle of the clause, but we want the new information at the end of the clause. So what if the new information is the verb? So like they called off the meeting, if the information, the most important information, the new information is what was called off, well, they called off the meeting, then that's fine. But what if we knew there was a meeting and then I want to tell you, well, they called off the meeting, right? So I could use stress, you know, just prosodic stress or, you know, intonation to stress the element that's new information. And you can do that anywhere in the sentence in English. So I could say they canceled the meeting or they called off the meeting, where I put stress on that word to show that that's the new information, not meeting. But that's a kind of marked thing, and it's sometimes misunderstood. And also when you're writing, there is no prosody. So the alternative is to, when you use one of these kind of things, you can move the part of the predicate to the end of the clause. So you can say, they called the meeting off. And so this is the same principle as we saw with the benefactive. Remember we talked about the client and the recipient, where you say, I gave the book to John, I gave John the book. You know, the same principle that's involved there is involved here. So when the meeting is not the newest information, then it comes before off. When the meeting is the newest information, then it comes after off. So the single process can get broken up into two bits. And so that satisfies the verb medial rule of English, but at the same time allows you to put kind of the new information at the end of the clause. And so your intonation comes at the end of the clause. And languages often have this kind of conflict between two things, just like we saw with the WH word when it's subject. A lot of people said, well, how do you know when the WH word is a subject? The reason why that's a tricky one is because there are two rules in English. One is that the subject is the unmarked theme. The other one is that the WH word should be the theme. And then there's another rule that when you have a question, the finite and subject should be reversed. So then you have this conflict between reversing the subject and finite and having the WH word in initial position when it's the subject. So you have to resolve it one way or the other. So in this case, you know, what did he do? Then the finite comes after the subject in that case, because the rule of putting WH in the theme is more important to speakers. And the same thing here, we have this conflict between having the verb in the middle of the clause and then, but putting the new information at the end. So when the verb is the new information, then we can split it up and say they called the meeting off. I called John up. You know, instead of saying I called up my boss yesterday, I would say I called up my boss yesterday, but I called John up because John is, you know, if we know we're talking about John, then I could say we called John up, where the new information is that I called him, not that not something else. You know, I didn't do something else. And it's not who I called. Read this when you get a chance, because that's kind of what I just said. Yeah, so that's what I said. Okay, so the last type of group is the adverbial group. And in adverbial group, you have the same kind of principle where you have one thing that's the head, the kind of main meaning, and that's the thing that's modified. So like quickly, and in this case, like with the noun group, you can have modifiers in front of it, and you can have modifiers after it. So it may be just one word, like quickly, you know, he walked quickly, but then I can expand on that group and say he walked more quickly than I did, or he walked much more quickly than I could, or whatever. So you can build them up in the same way, and generally with these guys, you have polarity. This is one thing that some people sometimes misunderstand. When you have polarity as part of the adverbial group, that's when it's not the finite. If it's within a, you know, so for example, like he did it not too quickly, then it's within. It could be within the adverbial group rather than being within a finite. You often have these intensifiers. You know, he did it very quickly, or rather quickly, or amazingly quickly, or comparison, like more quickly, less quickly. And then after the verb, it's usually going to be something about comparison. So if you say easier than I thought, you know, compared to what I thought, or too quickly for us to see what happened, or so beautiful, I mean, as early as 2 o'clock. So with these things, the post modifier, again, can be either a preposition phrase or a clause. And it generally has this kind of either comparative or some other type of meaning modifying the head of the phrase. And then preposition phrase I've been talking about off and on. It's a clause-like structure with a process and a predicator, where the preposition is treated as a process. So you can see the comparison when you say something like cross the lake versus crossing the lake. So crossing the lake is verb complement. Cross the lake, across the lake, I mean. So this is preposition complement. This is verb complement. But you can see how close they are. So, and so we just treat them the same way. The preposition takes a complement, which corresponds to range, goal, or attribute. But since within that group it's not clear what the distinctions are, we call them range in all cases. And this one, you don't have the same kind of modificational structure with this alpha and beta, gamma type of thing. It's just you have the preposition and then the complement. So it's more like the clausal analysis. So here, the man is digging frantically in the ditch. So what we're talking about here is in the ditch. So we have in as the process and the ditch as the range. The whole thing is an adjunct within this larger clause. But within that adjunct, we can talk about it as predicator and complement. And I put it in quotes just because it's not a real predicator like this one is. This one, I mean. But, and the complement is not a real complement in the case that, you know, the normal complements are. But it's the same kind of function, just in a reduced level. Okay. Any quick questions? I know people are worried about the exam. Why? What? Oh, the reason she's asked me why to repeat why I put this in quotation marks, because just to not confuse it with this predicator. So this predicator is in quotation marks, just so it's not confused with this. This is the main predicator of the clause. This is a minor process, or you know, either a minor process or minor predicator. And this is not a range like it was a clausal type constituent. It's only within this minor clause or minor process that we call that a range. So that's why I put it in what we call scare quotes. Means it's not really a range, so you put it in quotes. And it's not really a predicator, so you put it in quotes. Okay. Any other questions before I tell you about the exam? The test is going to be exactly just doing this. And you're going to get, no, don't worry. Instead of doing the toots for this lecture, we're going to do exercise, which are actual exams, a double exam in a way. The exam is just a few lines, and you just have to block it off. And today's lecture won't be covered in the exam. But everything up to today is going to be covered. And today in the toots, you're going to be doing an exercise which is exactly what the exam is like. So you'll have double practice of that. So that's it. Any other questions, comments? Okay. Have a nice break. Hi.
Modifiers usually don't have the plural form, is it?
The what?
The post modifiers for the nominal group don't